And welcome to another episode of Benny Boy trying to make a video out of whatever he's trying to work on behind the scenes. So, first and foremost, this is at least the box for the Behringer U-Phoria UMC404HD audio interface. For the small segment of my viewership that's not sure what that might entail, this is an audio recording interface to hook up to the computer to allow me to run microphones and such into it. Second of all, this is not a tutorial. There are good, thorough tutorials for this thing on YouTube already, just in case you wandered into this video not knowing the regular tone of this channel. So what today's video really is my commenting on this device, as well as bringing you up to speed on some of the goings-on at Archive HQ. And actually, let's start with that. So I feel like such a broken record saying this at this point, but I've been trying in fits and starts at least for a few months now to make some new original incidental music for Oddity Archive, largely so I don't have to worry about copyright junk. But I've been wanting to have some kind of semi-permanent setup, so as the time and inspiration allow, I can more or less just jump right into recording. Now, I'm usually a Pro Tools person, Pro Tools software, and anyone that's ever dealt with Pro Tools, especially prior to about 2015, knows that it is terribly persnickety about things that you really wouldn't expect out of an audio program, like what graphics card is in your machine. Kind of the last thing I'd think about for audio software. So I would usually use my Apple desktop for that kind of thing, and, well, these days it's always tied up with regular Oddity Archive production. And every bit of available space around that computer I need for my usual mountain of papers and media. So if I want to record music, I have to do a full setup and a full teardown every time. As such, I've tried to build my little semi-permanent rig based around my Windows laptop, which I have to use Cubase on, and I'm about 2 seconds away from going over to Reaper because I don't really like Cubase. But I can't do Pro Tools on it because Pro Tools hates PC NVIDIA graphics cards, at least of that period. 2011 is when that computer was made. Now, as far as my usual Macintosh desktop Pro Tools setup goes, I already own an old MBox 2 Pro interface, which I use for archive, which was designed for Pro Tools, and tends not to play too nice with much else. I mean, I can kind of fake it if I need to, but it also only has 2 inputs, so it's just not leaving its usual spot. That finally brings us back around to the Behringer. Now, when I was starting to move away from tape to digital, one of the first pieces of gear I owned was a Behringer USB single microphone interface. It did not work at all, period. And I bought it new and everything. Obviously, I don't have it anymore. But the only other significant piece of Behringer audio gear I've ever owned is the little so-called 4-channel mixer that I use when I'm doing my little Part 15 broadcasting shenanigans. It's not a very good mixer, but it gets the job done. So I guess that kind of sums up my attitude about Behringer. It's the brand you go for when cheap and cheerful will do. So I was actually really surprised to see just how much Behringer has come up in the world just in the last 5 years or so. And they're making synthesizers and stuff now too. And getting back to audio interfaces here, I was actually initially looking into a Scarlett Focusrite interface. So either way, from the beginning, nothing too fancy, just a reasonable little home recording solution. There's only one of me, I don't really do outboard gear or any of that, so obviously I'm not going to be going for a big board. But anyway, I kept noticing the Behringer U-Phoria line coming up in the Amazon.com sidebar, and all these comparisons amongst the Amazon reviews. And within those reviews, the Behringer seemed to be, according to them, performing the same or better than the Scarlett, and at a lower price. So this, after tax, was about $170. And just to put this in perspective, my old M box about 10 years ago was about $600. Come a long way, haven't we? So anyway, obviously I took a chance on the Behringer, and let's just run through the features here. So we've technically got 4 inputs, definitely more on that later. And you can go either XLR or 1/4 inch in. Then we've got the according, I don't know how you want to put, little modules maybe. So we've got for each track, mic level and line level, and a pad, which cuts the signal by about 20 dB. More on that later. And of course, the gain knob, how much level are you using? And if we go farther down the line here, we've got the stereo mono switch, more on that later, and the mix knob. So this is truly funky, and I'll only kind of half cover it right now, but it's like that little gap when you're recording to tape, actual tape. There's a slight gap between the live recording and it being monitorable. If that's not a word, it is now. But in this case, you've got the live sound or the slightly delayed playback or any point in between. Then we've got another knob here for main out, so to any external speakers. And you can do multiple sets of speakers, so you can go like near field or far field. And then, of course, we got to have the headphone jack, 1/4 inch, and headphone level. So let's look at the back here. So on the back here, we've got a spot for an AC adapter. And unless you're recording onto a laptop, you're probably not going to need it. But I am going onto a laptop, and my laptop certainly doesn't supply enough power, so I do have to use it, and it comes with it. Then, of course, to get to the computer, we need USB, and that's just a plain old printer cable. We got MIDI, in and out, old-fashioned 5-pin MIDI. We got phantom power, so the 48-volt boost that you need for condenser mics. And I just leave this on if I'm dealing with mics. But if I'm doing direct-in stuff, so an old keyboard that I'm running 1/4 inch into here, or something more modern, with MIDI, then I'll turn it off. So then we've got all sorts of options for external speakers. So in this bank, we've got the choice between RCA or 1/4 inch. And here we can get real fancy. If you got the fancy pants XLR speakers, you can do that, or 1/4 inch. And lastly, inserts. And I've never owned anything with something like this. So what we've got here is a way of running outboard gear into here. And the numbers correspond to the 4 inputs. So for example, say I've got a standalone compressor. I can run it into 1 here, have a mic into input 1 in the front, and I can record wet. So the effect is there and cannot be removed. Okay, here's the good news. The preamp on this is surprisingly good. Not great, but on par, if not slightly better than my old M box. And when I say slightly, I mean very slightly, so I'm just going to call it a wash. So my old M box is a little hissy, and this is about on par with it. Not great, but perfectly livable. Now also, save for a driver download I had to do, This thing was more or less plug and play. Didn't have to do anything special or weird with it on my Windows 7 laptop. I'm a little behind. And this was outright plug and play on my Apple, so good there. But otherwise, that's about the extent of the good things I have to say. So now on to the gripes. And my chief one is that this unit, anything like this should be explicit in its labeling. So there's a slight bit of dishonesty here. We don't have 4 independent channels. We've got 2 stereo pairs. So if you got a single channel mic or instrument and you're going into channel 1, it's going to be hard left in your mix. Or if it's 2, hard right, 3 is left, 4 is right. Now, I mean, we can fold down to mono, but what that does is it takes, say you've got a track with a whole lot of instrumentation on it, it's gonna take your already rough mix and do a mono fold down of it, and your already probably fairly muddy rough mix is gonna be that much worse. So my way around it and allowing myself to keep in stereo so I can pan things off and keep the center open to focus on what I'm doing is because of the miracle of splitter cables, I'll just do 2 tracks at a time. So then I can have dual mono, the illusion of center, and when I'm done with that track, I can just delete one of the channels. Now, also, another gripe that I have is, and I think this is a perfectly valid one, I get the feeling that the pad function is, it's to somewhat compensate for the lack of headroom in this thing. So if you look at the box, it's kind of trying to make you think you have things actually running to it. But really, you see, everything but channel 2 is actually clipping. So this is actually pretty accurate. So you're either in the green and you're doing just fine, or you're clipping. So there's no safe zone. And yeah, it makes it easy to overshoot what you're doing or wind up with overly quiet levels and a lot of extra noise when you're bringing it back up. So I definitely don't like that. But having said that, I mentioned that the pad was to, I think, somewhat compensate for that. So it gives you that nice big cut, but really it's kind of the only way you can buy yourself any headroom. But it's such a deep cut in level that it's really only good for really loud things like mic'd up electric guitars, guitar amplifiers. So, yeah. And then just a petty little nitpick of mine, admittedly, I'm not really a fan of this mostly black design, certainly black and gray. And of course, you got all these abbreviations here, and it's just not easy to read at any kind of distance. So you have to come in close. And if I'm working on something and I'm just trying to do my thing, focus on my performance, I don't really like having to lean in and kind of have to make sure I'm hitting the right thing and deal with all these jammed together buttons. So I think that's still valid. But anyway, final thoughts. Only time will tell if I warm up to this thing. I guess I'll leave you with a few bits of demo recording, different mics and such, just to show off the sound, which is perfectly fine. It's perfectly solid. And really, I guess I can't complain too much after all that. Because for the price point, you're probably not going to do much better. The real determining factor for each person is how well are you going to take the quirks of this thing. And even though I've mostly dealt in low-end gear in my life, I still feel like this is a little low for me. It feels like I have to really screw around with it to get something a little more stable and a little more clean in terms of uh, organization and such. But yeah, that's up to you. Anyway, this wound up being a much more chatty video than I thought. So I guess I'll shut up now. That's it for today's Ben's Junk, and all irony aside, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, I'm speaking on a Rode NT1 condenser microphone, a very hot microphone, one that I don't have to have the level up too far on. Also, a microphone that's known to reject noise pretty well. I'm sitting, I would say, about 4 or 5 inches away from the microphone, and yeah, once again, Rode NT1. Okay, this is my other microphone, and I only own two significant ones. I'm talking to you via a Shure SM57 dynamic mic right now. Like the Rode, very, very common, and I'm at about the same distance. It's a mic that takes a lot more level to come through. It accepts a lot more noise, but again, within the context of this interface, it's normal.